So I'm gonna
know if you can explain it better.
I'm gonna pull up a map and then show you kind of what's going on and what the conflict is, if that's okay.
Yeah, and just try to explain it visually for people who might be just listening.
Yes.
For our huge audio listeners.
Yeah, are huge. We just hit 2,000 downloads, so to me that's huge.
Okay. Wait, why can't you see this? Okay.
No, we see it.
I can see
No,
it.
I know, but I want to share something else. It seems like it's not what I wanted to show. Give me a second. I know why. Right there. That's the map I want to show. Okay. You probably... some folks might have seen Ruslan's kind of Pray for Armenia kind of clip, and it's got this picture in there. There's a reason why I'm using this clip, because it explains a number of things. What you see here in the darker orange, I guess, is modern day Armenia. Okay, not including this part. This Akhal Kalaki is in Georgia, but if you guys pay attention, you'll see a little beautiful woman facing this way, and that's her neck.
I don't know if I define that as beautiful, but sure.
Okay, I won't hold that against you. This is modern, current Armenia. That's the map of Armenia. It's a tiny little country. As you can tell, up to the north, it's got Georgia and Russia, Azerbaijan to its east, to its west, it's Turkey. Now, where you see it says Western Armenia is all Turkey. And then you got Iran on the bottom over here to the south.
Nice.
Now, this little segment here, it's actually pronounced Nakhichevan, which is essentially a disconnected region, but it belongs to Azerbaijan. Okay. This part where it says Artsakh or Nagorno-Karabakh, this is a more updated map actually. It's supposed to go down. Is historic Armenian land. Nagorno-Karabakh is the kind of Turkic Russian name for it. Armenians call it Artsakh. And some of the oldest churches we have are in this area. I've been there. I was there in 2020. I did a video with Ruslan talking about going to a place where it was a disciple. It was the grave of a disciple of Thaddeus. His name was Dadi. The place is called Dadivank. But so historically, this region's been a mess. Okay, so the Ottomans have ruled it, the Iranians have ruled it, the Russians have ruled it, Armenians have ruled it. Georgians really haven't come that south, but probably did at one point. The Azerbaijan wasn't a country officially till like the 1918 or 1921, one of those two. I think 1918. But that's not to say that Azerbaijani people didn't live in there. I think we have records going back to like the 1000s AD where we get kind of a mention. And some people think Azerbaijanis are Turkic, but also like sort of Turkic Iranians. So this northern part of Iran is full of Azerbaijanis. They're Persian, essentially Iranian Azerbaijanis. But in 1920s, the Russians took over this area. Okay. Oh man, I should back up. Forgive me. After the genocide, essentially after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, there was actually a treaty that was signed by Western powers, where you say it says Western Armenia was supposed to be given to Armenia. Armenia was supposed to be that big. The Ottoman Empire was going to become very small. And part of it was going to be Greek and so on and so forth. But the Turks had a revolution with Ataturk. Modern Turkey was established. They essentially fought wars, pushed the Armenians back into whatever the modern borders are. The Russians took over this area and then made a deal essentially with the Turks to put this region of predominantly Armenians, Nagorno-Karabakh, Artsakh, within the map of Azerbaijan, okay, which includes this orange here with this yellow. And it was like that. Armenians and Azeris were living together because they were Soviet republics. The issue was that Armenia was a Soviet republic, Azerbaijan was a sort of Soviet republic, but this area, this autonomous sort of area, was considered a kind of separate territory. It wasn't a republic, but it was a territory. They kind of self-governed themselves. When communism fell in the 1990s, And I was in Armenia when that happened, and I remember what's called the First Karabakh War. I was about 5 years old. The predominant majority of the Armenians decided that they were going to join Armenia. The Azeris saw that as like an internal rebellion, and so sent in troops basically, and there was ethnic clashes, fighting, sent in troops to squash it. The Armenians said, no, we're not going to have that, and sent in their troops, and there was a war fought for about 4 years. And the Armenians ended up winning that. Now, what you see is in the yellow and the orange in this area is what the Armenians took. So they took Karabakh plus these other regions. So it's been a standstill, essentially ceasefire since 94. The US, Russia, and France have been trying to mediate and come to a resolution. Haven't really done much. In 2020, Azerbaijan launched a full-scale war on Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenia. Now, it never really attacked Armenia proper, but in that area, the fighting happened, and it was a 44-day war. This is during COVID, by the way. The whole world wasn't fighting, except the Azeris decided to launch a war in the middle of a pandemic. And they essentially won that, and then took all that yellow away, plus that little orange part. But the orange part was remaining, and the Russians stopped it and said, we'll mitigate it, and we'll try to see what's going to happen. And it's been in that state till about like a week and a half ago, when the Azeris launched, essentially in 24 hours, an insane attack, bombed every village they could, and got them to concede, lay down their arms. Now, and what they're calling is a liberation of their land. This is the way. It's anti-terrorism because these are internal, fighters who don't want to submit to the authorities. Now, the Azeris are saying, everyone there who's Armenian, if they want to stay here and become citizens of our country, can. We're not pushing them out. But the Armenians don't want to stay there. Now, there's reasons why they don't want to stay there. They don't want to stay there because there's lots of animosity. They don't want to stay there because they have no guarantees, really, that someone's not going to come and walk into their house and slit the throat of their daughters and kids and wives and husbands, because that's happened. And this is not me just saying that's happened. They put it on their own social media. They put it on their own Telegram channels. There's videos floating around the internet of them decapitating folks. Now, there's a Muslim, Christian, obviously, component to this. And so what's happening is there's 120,000 people in that area now, and they're all fleeing to this area of Gapan, or there's another area here called Goris. And so there's a refugee crisis, essentially, of these people evacuating historic lands they've been living on since the dawn of time, like since Noah got off the ark. And I'm not really exaggerating there, because Noah got off the ark essentially in this area right here. So it's not that far, guys. It's not that far from what we're talking about, right? Like, so you stand in Yerevan, you look this way, you see the mountains of Ararat. It's very clear, very beautiful. And so people have been there for a very, very long time. These Armenians have been there for a very long time. And now they're packing everything up into bags and they're going. And again, some people might be looking at that and say, well, Arthur, you're biased and stuff like that. Yeah, I'm biased. So what? Name me a person who's not biased. Like, go watch Al Jazeera. Tell me if they're not biased towards their Muslim friends. It's very clearly the case that there's a bias. I try to be as objective as possible. If people, whether Armenian or Azeri, doesn't matter to me. If they commit crimes against humanity, they should be punished by the full extent of the law, international law. I don't care about that. If they do that, the issue comes down is to who's doing what, who's done what, and figure that out. Currently, the Azeris are doing that. And again, they're recording it, they're putting it on the internet. So that's kind of a historical breakdown of what's happening, and then what's currently happening in regards to there's a refugee crisis. My main issue is that nobody really seems to care. The European powers didn't get involved. Why didn't Europe get involved? Because they got issues with Russia, and they're getting almost all their gas from Azerbaijan. That's the reality of it. The Azeri president is a dictator. He's been in power since 2002, 2001. And before him, the guy that was in power was his dad. That's the two leaders they've had since the fall of the Soviet Union. They're a pretty autocratic kind of dictatorship, and they have all sorts of human rights violations. They don't have much freedom when it comes to the press. You guys can look it up, and people rate these things. They're like number 5 on how bad they are when it comes to human rights violations, or they're like fifth. And ahead of them are countries like North Korea, by the way. So it's, you kind of get a sense of what's going on.
Yeah, I remember.
Go ahead.
I remember when we covered this. It's so sad that we have to cover it again, because I feel like we just covered it last year with the genocide that was going on, and the propaganda that you were like exposing on how the like media from Azerbaijan speaks about
Armenians.
Armenians. I don't know why that slipped, but it's just crazy, and it reminds you of when the Nazis would paint Jews as like rats, you know, and as less than human. So I can understand people saying like, oh yeah, Arthur's just biased because, you know, he's Armenian, but you just got to look at it objectively, look at what it is they're doing, and not just right now, right? Because somebody could take an airshot view of this and be like, oh, they're just trying to get their land and all of that stuff. But you just have to backtrack a little bit into just last year and the propaganda that was going around. And it's just really sad that the world ignores this for essentially for financial reasons.
Yes. And yeah, it's all sorts of parties are benefiting from these things. And, you know, the Americans want a presence there. They want the Russians gone. The Russians want a presence there for all sorts of reasons. Countries are selling weapons to each other. People are coming and fighting. In 2020, the Azeris had Syrian soldiers come fight, that Pakistanis fighting because they saw this as some kind of a weird jihad. In the 90s, they had Afghani Mujahideen come and fight the Armenians because they saw it as the, you know, infidel Christians they're fighting against. This is common knowledge. Like, somebody can just look it up and read some stuff. There's news reports from ABC and NBC that they're interviewing folks in Syria where they're like, yeah, we went and fought for Azerbaijan. And then the Azeri president will say, no, nobody came and fought for us. We didn't have any help. It's like, okay, we believe you. A guy that's a dictator, and cool. Vice has done something on this that's pretty fair, I think. There's all sorts of cluster illegal ammunition that's been used, cluster bombs that are used on both sides, it seems like. But the reality is this is the situation in that region. It doesn't get much attention. It's funny to me that like 3 years ago, a lot of Americans didn't know where Ukraine was or what a Ukrainian flag looked like.
Right.
And now you got the Ukrainian prime minister in the parliament of Canada, and he's getting a standing ovation and all this stuff because he's fighting against the evil Russians, you know. And then when we have real evil, not to say that Putin's any less of a dictator than Aliyev, but I would say Russians have way more freedom than Azeris. That's clearly the case. Nobody cares about this because it's just beneficial, and it's not an opportune time to go after that guy. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Especially with elections around the corner.
And help me understand also, when it comes to Armenia and the global world scale, do they have much of exports or anything? Like, do people rely on them on much of anything?
No, Armenia is a landlocked country. We export intelligence. And I'm being kind of sarcastic about that, but Armenia's most recent export has been computer programming, essentially. But in regards to natural resources, yeah, it's been stripped away. All those areas that would have had the natural resources.
Because generally speaking, whenever there's conflict, the only times powerful nations care is if there's resources involved, whether that be like oil or something like that, a natural resource.
Yeah, which Azerbaijan has both of.
or whether that
gas
be
and oil.
in the case of like, Ukraine's like right on the border of the UN and stuff, and so they care a lot because they don't want Russia to get closer to their borders.
By the way, Ukraine is one of the largest exporters of grain, for those who don't know.
So yeah, it all boils down to economics as of who they care about and who they don't care about, economics and politics.
Yeah, the sucky thing is that, then you get all these people who are whose lives are uprooted and destroyed
Right.
because of those decisions. I was looking at some pictures and videos of just the cars that are lined up trying to leave. It's heartbreaking. It really is, because these are people who've built their lives there, at the very least, for the past 30 years. Yeah.
Yeah, it's sad, man.
Definitely something to.
It's very
to
hard.
keep in
I
prayer.
would say it's very hard for Americans to kind of visualize why there would be this kind of animosity and hate. Because Americans have never had to experience that, really. So I'll give you an example. I was talking to a friend today, and I told him I was watching a video of a funeral, an Azeri funeral, and it was a soldier that had been killed, and the mother was there, and she was crying. Okay, and which is understandable. She's weeping. Her son has died. And people, when they're mourning, will say all sorts of irrational things. Okay, like, granted. But I'm going to repeat what this woman said. Okay? And then I'll tell you, and then when we get people saying, why don't the Armenians just stay there and become citizens? And I go, what do you think? This is one person. Okay? She said, essentially she was saying, we demand the blood of the Armenians. We want to drink their blood. We want to drink the blood of their children. She said babies, actually, not children. This is just a common 80-year-old woman who's in mourning, who can utter these sort of statements. Like, I guess there's a difference between saying, like, hey, we want justice. They unjustly killed our people. We want justice. But I think it goes beyond that when you're talking about, like, I want to drink the blood of their babies. Then you go, okay. And then now you're being told, well, yeah, these people want to live side by you, and you can do it peacefully. I'm not very sure what the resolution, well, I shouldn't say that. I think the resolution is for the Azeris and Armenians at mass to become Christians. Then there could be something peaceful happening there.
Yeah, it kind of reminds, I'm sorry.
Go.
That kind of reminds me of the Israel-Palestine situation.
Yes.
With how many times Israel has, tried to write a treaty and tried to come to a land sharing agreement and tried all of these things. And it's just, you can't with people who want to see the eradication of your entire race. Like, you can't come to terms and agreements with that, because if they openly tell you that, yeah, if we ever get in power, we're going to kill you all. And then you have the whole world like, oh, why is Israel so tough when it comes to this situation? And I get that's the only thing that in my mind that I've can at the moment compare it to. And I know they're two completely different situations, but what you're saying about seeing these pictures of just cars lined up to leave. Why would somebody be willing to leave their home? It's because they know that if they stay, that they're running the risk of somebody wanting to drink the blood of their children.
Yeah, and the thing is that if it's a closed country, it's like, who's going to find out?
Yeah, that's true. Very true. It's more,
like,
more
do we know
dangerous.
what's happening in North Korea right now?
Right, exactly.
No, I mean, for all we know, that they can go into a village and kill every single resident of that village, bulldoze it over, and say there was nothing here. And it's not like we haven't witnessed this as a people. I mean, the genocide had this, right? Like, there is people finding mass graves in Turkey and in the deserts of Syria, and they know they're Armenian graves. They're mass graves because they killed people and threw them into and just covered it up. So 100 some odd years later, it's like, oh man, we were digging and we came across a bunch of skulls. So, but who cares? It's like in a certain sense, it's like 100 some odd years later is way too late, way too late to be like, oh, by the way, let's bring some attention to this. I mean, that's currently when stuff like this is happening is where we should be at. Armenians continuously have open wounds of this sort because this stuff seems to never stop. And it sort of is like this repetition that is happening in our history.
Thanks so much for watching that clip from the Why Jesus podcast. If you want to see the full episode, click right here, and you can also find us on all streaming services. God bless.